20. The helicopter was late. Stephanie didn't mind. It gave her more time to observe Mulray's increasingly interesting behaviour. The two of them were still working together, although Mulray had twice asked to be transferred. Both times, O'Hara had routed the requests back to Stephanie, and Stephanie had torn them up. She was enjoying herself. Things had reached the point now where Mulray wouldn't even look her in the eye. The longer the flight was delayed, the more nervous Mulray became. Eventually, he went to sit in the control shack with the pilots. Stephanie remained outside on the rooftop, watching big clouds moving over the city. She was wearing a breathing mask today to protect her face against the hot, sooty winds blowing in from the west. Finally, the biostock technicians brought the teenage boy up. Two of them came out onto the roof wearing the standard white overalls with the Butler Institute logos on the back. They wheeled the stretcher across the roof surface towards the painted circle where the helicopter sat. The boy's head was lolling, a small plastic tube taped to his cheek so it remained fixed in his nose. His arms were lashed down on top of the blanket in case he regained consciousness. Stephanie read the boy's name off the ID tags that were hanging outside the blanket. Vincent Wheaton. The technicians on the 51st floor had found the tags around his neck when he was being processed. Vincent was the reason the flight had been delayed. He had been picked up on a routine sweep of the junkies in Central Park and would normally have gone straight into biostock. He looked cleaner and healthier than the average derelict or street dweller, but the park sweeps were unpredictable, and by rights the boy should have been spare parts by now. But there was a new memo from O'Hara which altered the biostock protocol. It was apparently based on an article in a British newspaper, and it specified a new range of blood tests to be carried out on all incoming stock. Vincent's blood had rung bells on all the tests, so the clinical sacrifice was postponed, the boy was flagged as something special, and his unconscious body was scheduled on the next flight out to the Catskills. Mulray came out of the flight shack now and watched as the technicians put Vincent in the back of the helicopter. They strapped him down on a portable life support unit, with heavy sedatives being fed into his bloodstream in a glucose solution. "If they're pressed for space, I can fly out later," said Mulray. "I've got a lot of desk work to catch up on." Stephanie said nothing. "So long as it's okay with you," said Mulray. Stephanie smiled. When they reached the construction site after the flight, Stephanie made Mulray wait while she pulled on some rubber boots in the site office. There had been some drainage problems at the site, with runoff from the mountainside above flooding the tunnel. As soon as Stephanie had the boots on, she set off for the tunnel mouth, not giving Mulray time to change. She was fascinated to see what he would do. He came trotting after her, still wearing his expensive, gleaming street shoes. By the time they were inside the tunnel, they had been reduced to muddy ruin. Men and women in white coats were trudging back from lunch in the company canteen on the surface, picking their way among puddles in the rutted mud of the tunnel floor. The excavation work was complete now, but the ground was still crisscrossed with the tyre tracks of the heavy machinery. Japanese and Korean technicians in hard hats were inspecting the wall and studying blueprints, studiously avoiding each other as they planned the installations of the mainframes and the multiple generators. Lengths of plastic piping were stacked along the tunnel walls, and fat power cables were hung in loops along the ceiling. The suite of prefab huts which Stephanie used as her offices were located 150 metres down the sloping length of the tunnel. But even this deep, it was impossible to see how much further the tunnel went. It faded away in the thick mists of evaporating runoff that glared under the harsh beams of the temporary lighting system. Stephanie unlocked the offices and flicked on the lights, leaving Mulray outside trying to scrape the mud off his shoes and the cuffs of his suit pants. She went directly to the telephone on the nearest desk and dialed the number for O'Hara's house. She knew it must be a difficult day for him, and she wanted to lend her support. The signal from Stephanie's phone travelled a kilometre via landlines, routed through the communications centre up to O'Hara's redwood house on the slope above the excavation site. Inside the big house, the B&O home entertainment computer detected the incoming call and came to life. The video sample created by O'Hara's son was still in the memory of the machine, and it was the default image for all communications. So instead of a simple telephone bell ringing, the B&O created a holographic image of Jack Blood and sent him stalking through the house, looking for the inhabitants, eager to inform them of the phone call. The pumpkin-headed killer strutted across the wide, empty living room, the image of a jagged carving knife waving in one holographic hand, and the image of an old-fashioned telephone presented on a silver butler's tray in the other. Jack wandered the length of the silent living room, his image fading a little and the colours turning watery in the mountain sunlight as he crossed in front of the floor-to-ceiling picture window. He then quartered the room, exploring it carefully, empty pumpkin eye sockets scanning from side to side as he searched for someone to take the call. Once it was clear that the living room was empty, the hologram promptly vanished, only to appear in the kitchen. Projectors mounted high on the walls of the room picked up the signal from the home entertainment unit and projected Jack in full colour and apparent solidity, striding the tile floor between gleaming refrigerator and cooking unit. The kitchen was bare and peaceful, only a slight buzzing from the refrigerator disturbing the silence. Jack paused, standing in the quiet sunlight, then turned and strode through the wall, the projector in the master bedroom picking him up and flashing his image into the shadows as he appeared again. The blinds were down in the master bedroom, and the silence was heavy. Jack stood there only for a moment before moving on to Patrick's bedroom at the back of the house. He prowled up and down the little boy's room, stalking among the colouring books and crayons and computer scattered on the floor. He peered into both layers of the bunk bed, but all he found was a tangle of sheets and blankets. Jack stood in the doorway of the empty closet. Finally, he walked over to stand with his back to the window, the unanswered telephone still sitting on the silver tray in his rotted twig hand. His misshapen head was tilted to one side, giving an illusion of regret, as if Jack was sad that he couldn't complete his mission. Now Stephanie abandoned her call and hung up the receiver a kilometre away. The disconnect code pulsed along the wire, and the B&O cancelled Jack. Just before the hologram vanished, the tall pumpkin head did a final turn, as if giving the child's bedroom a final survey. The computer graphics faded when he was halfway through the turn. The image froze and lingered for a moment, apparently staring out the window at the mountain slope below the house. It was almost as if he could see through the glass, as if he was looking at the man and his wife sitting out there on the lawn. Outside the house, O'Hara stood up and began to pace down towards the tree line. His wife remained sitting in one of the expensive white plastic all-weather chairs. O'Hara came back across the lawn to the chairs and set his glass down beside his wife's. Ants had already discovered the other drink and were crawling around it, up the slick sides and into the glass. O'Hara sighed. "I'm sorry you had to find out the way you did. But you must have suspected. All the research has been heading in this direction." He turned and looked down towards the excavation site beyond the thinning trees. "And now we're almost ready to get started." O'Hara's wife said nothing, and he hurried on, filling the silence. "All right, I know how you feel. I know your side of the argument. In fact, I can probably put your own case better than you can." He crouched on the lawn and searched for a moment. Then he plucked something out from among the strands of grass. One of the small wild flowers that had seeded itself, blown there on the mountain winds. He held it carefully between thumb and forefinger, inspecting it in the sunlight. "You might look at this flower," said O'Hara, "and you might see something of beauty. Perhaps you'd be moved by it. I know I'd be moved by it. But when we look at this flower, we see different things. I see the end processes of millions of years of evolution in action, life replicating itself, changing, taking new shapes. And the thing I'm doing, that project down the slope, that's the end product of the same processes. That is evolution too. It's no different than the colours and form of this flower. You see, we stand at the threshold of a new age. Industrialization has had a massive impact on our planet. Our machines have brought us many boons, but you might argue that they are also destroying the natural world. You might say that the degradation of the ecosphere is reaching crisis proportions, that if we don't take action now, there'll be no turning back. O'Hara looked at the flower again and let it drop from his fingers, falling back to the grass. And you'd be right. But there's something you don't understand. The machines that are polluting our world are built by human beings who have evolved on this planet. Our species has stopped evolving physically, but not mentally. Our minds keep on developing, and our machines are the creation of our minds. They are the next stage of our evolution. Now O'Hara's voice took on a note of excitement. He paced back and forth in front of the white lawn chairs. We don't need the natural world anymore. It doesn't matter if the flowers and trees and animals all die. It doesn't matter if we fill the sky and sea with poison, because none of those things can harm a world populated with machines. And our minds now have the skills to lift themselves out of our bodies and place themselves into those machines. O'Hara pointed to the line of trees and the construction site beyond. Down there, we're building the first outpost of a new world. A deep bunker with generators that will last forever. Maintenance machines that can repair the generators and repair themselves as well. And we will fill that bunker with computers, and we'll fill those computers with people. Minds that can live forever in the memories of those computers. And that's just the beginning. O'Hara sat down near his wife's feet, sitting cross-legged on the damp grass among the small wild flowers. Soon we'll be building sites like this all over the world, and they are the blossoming of evolution just as surely as these flowers are. What hurts, said O'Hara, is that you look at me as if I'm some kind of monster. I'm not saying this will be just the salvation of a super-rich few. They'll be the first beneficiaries, certainly. But eventually, we intend to offer this salvation to everyone. The project is in its infancy, but we already have the first prototypes out in the field, where the technology will be shaped by market forces. It will evolve, and it will evolve quickly. The first human beings have already been saved from a poisoned world. We had 2 pilot tests, and they showed that the method worked. Then we took the mind of an ordinary policeman and transformed it. And now our son has volunteered to be part of this project. There were tears in O'Hara's eyes. Right this minute, he's down at the site, beginning his evolutionary journey. And you should be proud of him. You should be proud of me. I've offered him a new world. O'Hara reached down and picked his wife's glass off the lawn. A dozen small ants were floating in it, all dead. If you had been just a little more patient, a little more willing to listen, I could have offered it to you as well. He got up, holding the glass. He closed his wife's eyes and he touched her cold hand. Then he went into the house. The playroom was full of toys. It was brightly lit, with a floor made of clean blonde wood. You would never have guessed it was inside the smallest of the prefab huts at the rear of the group that made up Stephanie's suite of offices. The windows were sealed with blackout material so that you couldn't see the mud walls and raw construction of the tunnel outside. Now a 5-year-old boy entered the room. Patrick O'Hara came in slowly, looking around. He ignored the toys. Instead, he looked at the large vents in the floor. Then he came directly over to the mirror and looked at it. He stared into the big square of reflective glass above the sink. It was as if he expected it to be a window into another room rather than just a mirror. Smart kid, thought Stephanie, sitting in the darkness of the adjacent room. She moved her chair a little to the left. Now Patrick was staring right at her through the 2-way glass. He wasn't looking away, even though he must be able to hear the gas by now. Stephanie had expected him to go over to the floor vents and look at them. But instead, the small boy just stood there, watching the mirror above the sink, staring into the next room at Stephanie, his little face looking somehow sad and knowing. Stephanie thought it was a fascinating expression. She wished she'd thought to record it, record the whole procedure in fact. But on second thoughts, the gas was coming into the playroom pretty quickly, filling it with thick white mist, and pretty soon a camera would be unable to pick up any image. There was already a thin mist between Patrick's face and hers, the boy's face softening in the white vapour, losing details of its expression, becoming a blank slate. Now you could imagine any expression on it. Stephanie imagined the face smiling at her, with that heart-catching smile kids sometimes have. Then any suggestion of a face was blurred away, lost like a pattern you had imagined in the cloud staring up into the sky on a hot summer's day. Mulray was sitting in a chair just behind Stephanie's. She had made sure that he had had a clear view of what was happening in the playroom. Stephanie would have liked to stay in the observation suite a little longer, even though there wasn't much to see, but this whole visit was something of a luxury. O'Hara was promoting her to the position of project organiser, and soon she'd be on site permanently, moving into his house. There would be plenty of room now. But before she transferred from New York, Stephanie had to clear her desk. That meant flying back in an hour and paying a final visit to the office and doing one last sweep of the police cells. She would take Mulray with her. Stephanie liked having him around. When the lights came on, Stephanie stood up and went to the door, wasting no time. Mulray blundered to his feet and came stumbling hastily after her, as if he was afraid to be left alone in the small room. They emerged into the bright, flat lighting of the tunnel, and she had a good look at Mulray's face. He was looking very old indeed. As they left, the surgical teams were entering the playroom, their faces concealed behind breathing apparatus.